Hey folks, welcome back to the channel. Glad you're here. You ever just get out there, get some exercise, and then it just takes it out of you? Boy, last week, every time I went out and I worked out, I rode my bike over 10 miles and I walked over 4 twice, and every time it took everything out of me I had. Trying to get back into shape. It's been a rough road this last year, and man, I'm probably at about 250 miles this year, so we're getting there. We're working hard at it. But anyway, that's not what today's video is about, but just kind of the way I feel sometimes, just kind of beat up and worn out. Anyway, I want to talk about batteries, folks, and I just turned this so I didn't electrocute myself. I see a lot online where folks are just delving into building a solar power or off-grid power system, and their first instinct seems to be to go get some 12-volt batteries of one given size or another, and to go get some solar panels, and they've probably figured out enough to get themselves at least an inverter, maybe a charge controller. But then they'll come in to one of the groups in various social media platforms and say, how big of a, how much do I need? I saw one recently. I'm in a caravan, so I'm guessing that's Europe somewhere. And I've got a dog, and how do I keep my caravan, my van, from getting too hot during the day because it's 45 degrees in here now? And I'm thinking he means Celsius, so that's, I don't know, 130 degrees, 110, 20, I don't know what it is. What's the conversion? Put it down below for me. In any case, he's looking at getting a air conditioning unit that pulls something like 3,000 watts and trying to install that into his caravan and run it off his solar power. Well, let's just say that that's what you're stuck with, that you got a 3,000 watt something or rather, and you want to run that every day. How do you know how big of a system to have? And that's really the question, right? How big of a system do I need? How many batteries do I need in order to run this thing? Because ultimately, folks, it's the batteries that matter. You only have so much sunlight, right? This time of year, good production, easily 5+ hours in the northern hemisphere, maybe several hours more than that, depending on where you're located, how far north, etc. Obstruction and all that good stuff. Do you have a clear view of the sun and all that? But setting that aside, that ain't 24 hours. And we're not even talking about whether the clouds get out there or you've got a forest fire and there's smoke everywhere. Sun's not producing all the time. So you need batteries. How many do I need? Well, let's look at this battery. This one, which is a XZNY, 25.6 volts, 100 amp hours. Okay, well, on the back side, it says 2,560 watt hours. That's just simply P equals VI. P is power or watts, V is volts, and I is current. So this one is 2,560 watt hours. So if you have a 3,000 watt unit, this isn't going to run it for an hour. That's 3,000 watts for an hour is 3,000 watt hours. Well, this isn't going to run it for an hour. Now I have a 12 volt battery sitting over there, but that's 1,280 watt hours. That's half of this one. So it's pretty simple. If you're going to run an air conditioner for 6 hours a day, and it's 3,000 watts that it uses full time, let's just say it's full time, then you're going to need 6 3,000 watt batteries just to run that, and they'll all be depleted to 0 volts. That's pretty basic. So how do you figure out what you need? Well, the first thing you got to do is you got to get how many watts you're going to use. The first step always when it comes to solar power, the number one step prior to batteries, is to figure out how many watt hours or kilowatt hours, that's 1,000 watt hours, are you going to use of energy per day, 24 hours. That's number one. So before you jump into a group online somewhere and say, hey, I want to run a XYZ every day, how big of a battery bank do I need? Well, you probably just answered your own question, given a few little bits of information. If you have something that you need to run, let's say it's 160 watts, and you need to run it for 24 hours, that's 160 watt hours times 24. That gives you your total. This is 2,560 watt hours. So that's how you figure it out. You've got to first find out the amount of power a device uses, and they usually have those little yellow stickers that say Energy Star here in North America anyway. You get the Energy Star sticker and it says this will use 260 kilowatt hours in 1 year. Well, you divide that by 365 and that gives you how much you're going to use in a single day. That's number one. If you total everything, and yes, folks, that's what you have to do. You've got to go in and say, I'm going to run light bulbs. How many light bulbs do I want to run in my house every day? 10 light bulbs. Okay. And how many hours are you going to run each of those light bulbs? Pretty simple. Okay. Your inverter, that's the thing that you're going to plug into your batteries. That's going to give you the 120 volt. That's what that guy is. That could use anywhere from 10 to 75 watts. And it's going to run 24 hours a day, assuming that you're running a house or a cabin or an RV or whatever off of it. So you got to include that. Your charge controllers often use a little bit of power as well. It might only be 10 or 20 or 50 watts, but you need to include those. If you have internet, you put the modem down, the router down, the television down, the laptop down, whatever it is you're going to run. Make a list of every electronic device that you have, put beside them how many watts of power they use, and then beside that, how many hours per day. Multiply the watts they use times the hours per day, and that's the watt hours per day for that item. Total that whole group up, and at the bottom, you should have your total daily watt hours. Now, this is about batteries, not calculating a system, right? So we have this cool XZNY. How do we know we need this? The first instinct of most people is to go out and get a 12 volt batteries because that's what they're used to. They have them in their cars. They put them in RVs. You have a 12 volt radio. You have 12 volt lights. You got a 12 volt water pump, right? So you need to run 12 volts, right? No, not at all, actually. You could run 48 volts. And I wouldn't be surprised if that doesn't increase in the future. When I built the cabin system 14 years ago, 12 volt was a very, very common system to have out in the woods. People started doing 24 volts, but it was still fairly new. Not like 48 volt is today. 48 volt today is not new anymore. But that back then, most people were doing 12 and some 24 volt systems, and there might have even been some 48s out there, but I didn't remember seeing any anyway. So people, they're used to 12 volt, they understand it, they think anyway, and so they get 12 volts. The problem with 12 volts is that batteries in general are limited to how many you can put together in one battery bank. Now, for 12 volt lead acid batteries, like the golf cart batteries that I used to use, they generally say, that's the electrical engineers that specialize in battery banks, that you shouldn't have more than 3 strings in one battery bank of flooded lead acid batteries. They just don't really work very well beyond that. So my battery bank, which was 12 total batteries, was 4 6-volt batteries to make 24 volts times 3. And each of those 3 banks of 6-volt batteries that were wired in series so that I had 24 volts. Each of those 3 were then wired parallel to one another. So you have what's called a series parallel configuration. But that was about the maximum I could do with those golf cart batteries. Maybe I could have put a 4th string in, but you're really starting to push it. It takes up a lot of room too. So is that, is that a problem? Well, maybe not. Maybe you've got lots of room. I know of people that were putting in the same kind of systems that we had in telecommunications central offices. Big 48 volt systems with 2.2 volt cells. And each of those cells was bigger than this battery right here by 3 times. Big, huge cells. And they'd have 48 of them, 24 and 24, to make their 48 volt system. In any case, that's a lot of room that you're taking up. And again, is 12 volt necessary? Well, I'm going to tell you it's not. In fact, I would not today install a 12 volt battery bank in any system that I built. Now, I did look online at different calculators out of curiosity because I'd heard something, and the general rule of thumb seems to be if it's 1,000 watts or less that you're going to build a system for, then 12 volts is fine. I suppose. I mean, you could run 1,000 watt inverter off one 12 volt battery and maybe not use that entire capacity. It's all about how much energy you use. But perhaps it's because a 1,000 watt system is a pretty small system today. You could put in a couple 12 volt batteries, one inverter, charge controller, a couple solar panels, and you're done. And yes, then you don't need any extra equipment. Whereas if you're going to put in 24 volts, you would need a 24 volt to 12 volt converter if you run 12 volt items like I do out at the cabin. But that's no big deal. Those are pretty inexpensive today. So are there advantages to running 24 volts? Well, yes. For one, cable sizes. So when you look at that equation earlier on, I said power equals voltage times amperage. So if you have 2,560 watt hours, that equals voltage times current, or amperage. So that would mean that if you were to divide that power by voltage, you would get amperage, right? So if I have 2,560 watt hours and I divide by 12 volts, I'm going to get twice the figure than if I divide by 24. And that makes sense, right? Because 24 is twice as big as 12. So if you end up with 100 amps at 12 volts, you'll end up at 50 amps at 24. Now, why is that important? I'm already losing you. You're already like, that's it, I'm done, I'm out of here. This is math stuff. Not really. So have you ever heard the expression, it's not the volts that kill you, it's the amps? Well, it's true. Voltage is just a reserve. Amperage is the actual current that would be coursing through you if you get zapped. More amps creates more heat, needs bigger wires, creates more dangers, needs bigger breakers, right, or fuses. So if you're putting in a 24 volt system rather than a 12 volt system, you are likely to have smaller conductors between your batteries and your inverter, that's smaller wires. That means smaller dent in the pocketbook. You're going to have smaller breakers, smaller fuses, smaller disconnects, all that kind of stuff because it's all based on amperage. So that's number one. Number two, you can build a larger reserve with less batteries. So this battery right here, this XZNY 24 volt battery is actually smaller than two 12 volt batteries, which means if I put two of these in parallel to give myself 200 amp hours, that's going to take up less room than four 12 volt batteries. And I could put four of these in parallel twice and put them in series so that I have a 48 volt system with 400 amp hours. That would be just 8 batteries. I used to have 12 batteries to get myself 660 amp hours of lead batteries at 24 volts. I could do 8 batteries here, so 4 less, and these are smaller in size and lighter, and have 400 amp hours at 48 volts, which is equivalent to 800 at 24. So much bigger battery bank. Not only that, but these are usable 100%. 100%. Lead acid batteries, you're basically restricted to about 50% if you want them to last very long. And by very long, I mean, 5 years instead of 2. So what do we have here and why are we talking batteries? Well, folks, this battery here, which is a 24 volt battery. Now, is it a 24 volt battery? It's 25.6 volts. How is that 24? Because 24 is the nominal voltage. And I've talked about this before. Nominal voltage is what we call the battery bank. 12 volts, 24 volts, 48 volts, that's the nominal voltage. But a 24 volt LiFePO4 battery is 25.6 volts. And it's actually going to charge much higher, like 29. This guy here has a 3-year warranty. 2,560 watt hours, over 5,000 cycles. And in fact, you could get 10 or 15,000 cycles out of it if you don't overuse the battery, if you don't abuse it. You could put 4 of them in parallel and run 2 of those in series, so for a total of 8 batteries, 400 amp hours at 48 volts, which does mean, since you're restricted to 4 in parallel due to the BMSs, you'd only get 400 amp hours at 24 volts, which by the way is bigger than what I'm running at the cabin already. I'm running 360 amp hours. This battery here is about 40% smaller than the standard 24 volt LifePo 4 battery, and that's kind of impressive. And I gotta say, folks, new batteries today, I've been looking at a lot of new batteries. If you've watched my channel a while, you know that folks have been sending me batteries just like this one was sent to me. And I've been looking at a lot of them because I'm really curious to see where battery technology is going. And frankly, right now, I'm impressed. Batteries are getting smaller and smaller and smaller. I don't know how much smaller you can make a 100 amp hour 24 volt battery. But folks, if you look at the batteries I have at the cabin, they are this wide and 4 times taller than this. And they weigh 80 pounds. And each one of them is 120 amp hours at 24 volts. This is, I don't know, is it 40 pounds? Probably not. This battery right here, I saw this online today at like $390. I paid $1,200 for my 24 volt batteries last year. I'll tell you what, I wish I'd known about these batteries here, and maybe they weren't even available last year because this one's a bit small. But if I'd have known about these, I'd have put 4 of these guys in, frankly. I mean, absolutely. These things are nice. They are small. They've got the longevity. They've got a -8 degree cutoff for discharge, a 32 degree cutoff for charging. You can draw 100 amps off of them, 300 amps for like 5 seconds. That's crazy. And look at how small these guys are. They're crazy small. What a 3-year warranty. Absolutely impressive. Okay, back to the point. And thank you, XZNY, for sending me the battery. I appreciate it. I will be making use of this battery. And I will drop a link down below for anybody that wants to check it out. These are smaller, folks. I can't stress enough how much smaller these are than the older style 24 volt batteries, much less the big mules that I have from Big Battery Store. These guys are, this is like a Group 31 battery. And I've got another one that's a 12 volt battery, 100 amp hour. It's half the capacity and it's the same dang size. That's impressive. But in any case, back to picking your batteries, I'm going to tell you right now that the only reason to go with a 12 volt battery bank is if you're not only going to use maybe a 1,000 watt inverter on it, but you don't really have any plans to expand or do anything more with it. It's just a small, somewhat portable, easy to maneuver system, couple small batteries maybe, and an inverter, charge controller, and a fold-out panel like Michael Wilson has done over at Wilson Forest Lands. I think that's a great use for a 12 volt system. And if you haven't seen Michael Wilson's stuff, check his channel out. It's a pretty good channel. Beyond that though, I'm going to tell you right now, you should jump straight to 48 volts. 48 volts is going to give you much smaller conductors. It's going to be more efficient because the voltage of your battery bank is much closer to the output of your inverter. So number one, smaller conductors, smaller fuses, smaller breakers, smaller disconnects, right? All that's really important. Longer cable runs, that's important. A 12 volt system, for example, if you're setting up solar panels and you're keeping them as 12 volts, have like a 3% voltage drop over 50 feet on 10 gauge cable. 48 volts, wouldn't even bat an eye at 50 feet, could care less. You could go 100 feet, no problem. Same everything else. My point is you do get longer cable runs, smaller conductors, all that good stuff, and it is a more efficient system. But you might say, well, but how do I run my 12 volt car stereo? You get a converter, 48 volts to 12 or 24 to 12. Super simple, super easy, no problem. So if it were me, would I use this battery? Absolutely, I would. There's no reason not to. These are great batteries, 3-year warranty. So no fault of, no human-induced damage, i.e. you didn't set it in a pool of water or freeze it -30 degrees or whatever. 3-year warranty. That's pretty good. And they put the email for service right on the side of the battery, folks. I'm telling you right now, it's literally right on the side of the battery. service@xznYbattery.com, right on the side of the battery. So if it were me, I can only imagine. Think about this. $1,600. That's, wait, it's not even $1,600 actually. It's about $1,560 to get 400 amp hours of 24 volt batteries by using these batteries when I paid $1,200 for 120 amp hours. So I paid over $3,600. 4 of these would cost me less than half of what I paid just last year for my big battery mules. I would drop these in there in a heartbeat. Absolutely. Can't lose. Love it. I'm impressed. So in any case, as far as what size battery bank you should build, as I mentioned earlier, 1,000 watts or less, 12 volts. I still wouldn't myself personally, only because I know what you're going to do. There's a problem with solar power, folks. You're going to get into solar power and you're going to make it bigger. Just what you're going to do. You build a 12 volt system today, you'll convert it to 24 later. This right here is a 2,500 watt, 12 volt power inverter. Other than for testing purposes of last couple weeks ago or so, I haven't used it in 11 years because I converted to 24 volts and I just haven't had a need to run a 12 volt system ever since. I just don't see a point to it. You're gonna upgrade. 24 volts, I think 24 volts is a great system if it's a small to medium system. So I would say a system that is fairly beginner system, fairly small system, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 watts. I'm running 4,000 watts off of it. That's perfectly fine as long as you're cabled right and you've got the right breakers and everything. Up to that size, you're doing fine. If you're starting to look to get into a bigger system where 10,000 watt hours or 10 kilowatt hours of battery bank capacity, that's 4 times this, where you're looking at greater than that, maybe you need 20,000 or something like that. You're going to run air conditioners and all kinds of other stuff. Then you should go to 48 volts. Bigger is better in this case. Now, one last quick note about voltages, and I mentioned this earlier, nominal voltage. Nominal is just what we call it, right? This is called a 24 volt battery. It's a 25.6 volt battery, but we call it 24 volts because that's the system it's designed to be used in. Solar panels are the same. So don't think of solar panels by the voltage as any relation to anything else. I know, you're like, wait, what? If you're building a 24 volt battery bank, you do not need 24 volt solar panels. You could use 12 volt solar panels. In fact, I have 3 12 volt solar panels that, by the way, put out over 18 volts each, because that's how they work. I just put them in series and I use them to charge up a 24 volt battery bank. That's one of my 2 arrays. I've got some 24 volt solar panels. They all put out 36 volts. I've got them in series parallel. So they're running 72 volts to my charge controller. I could run a 48 volt panel. Doesn't matter. What matters is the charge controller, not the batteries. So when you're building a system, when you're trying to decide what size battery bank to build, after you've calculated out how many watt hours of reserve you need, then try to build that with the biggest, baddest batteries that you can. Get 100 amp hour, 24 volt batteries if you're going to be building a 12 to 24 volt system, because don't build a 12 volt system unless you're just running a laptop and a few lights and maybe some internet or something like Michael Wilson is. There's really not much point in building a 12 volt system in my view. You might as well just go straight to 24. So for smaller systems, I'm going to recommend 24 volts. Anyway, folks, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. I hope I helped somebody out. And again, thanks to XZNY for sending me this battery. I love it. It's a pretty impressive battery. Can't wait to play with it some more. I think we might be powering some lights with it here in the shop. Stay tuned in the future, folks. And meanwhile, I'll drop another video right here for you to check out. Thanks for watching, everybody. Appreciate you being here. The old jarhead out.